The latest episode on my true crime channel is about Craig Freer, who just up and disappeared after leaving his girlfriend's house. It's a very interesting case and the links are below. My wife and I got married in 2008, and to celebrate we decided to travel and see some of the national parks before settling down. About a month into our trip, near the end, we were up in Glacier National Park in Montana. We had reserved our campsite almost a year in advance, and the park was pretty busy. So to avoid touristy areas, we decided to hike to Avalanche Lake. This lake is absolutely stunning. It's pretty popular, but we started out really early and we were lucky only to see a handful of other serious hikers along the trail. The trail we took was the Trail of Cedars, about a 6-mile hike. At the time we started, it was about 46 degrees out and clear skies with no wind. We had a light pack since it was only a few miles in and planned to head back to camp and relax after, as it was our last night in Montana. We had made it to the lake around 9 a.m. and had a beautiful view of the stunningly clear water. We found this little side trail that went up to an overlook, and once we got up there, we found an awesome private spot just to chill while we snacked and just took in the views. My wife and I were taking in the silence. We play this game where we stay completely quiet on some sections of the hike to feel more connected with nature, and I heard a light splash. I turned to it quickly, expecting to see a good-sized pike or bass surfacing, but only caught the ripples moving out. I nudged my wife and I pointed. She watched the same spot for a moment, but then when nothing else happened, she looked off in her own direction. Then some movement caught my eye and I looked down and to the left near the shore. There was something just a few yards out in the water. Was it swimming or walking? It was kind of hard to tell. I thought that maybe a moose had come out of the woods and into the water. The only thing that I can really say is that this creature was dark and seemed to stand out against the sunlit water. "What in the hell was that?" my wife murmured, and I realized she had seen it too. We quietly talked about the possibilities, but within 2 minutes this thing surfaced again, this time further out into the lake. "That water has to be freezing," I told my wife, and then I saw this arch of a very long neck. My wife's hand tightened down on my wrist and I held my breath, completely struck by what I was seeing. The water was so clear in this area that we could see the outline of the body beneath, a blurry shadow. It looked exactly like a dinosaur. That sounds crazy, but my 7-year-old nephew was obsessed with dinosaurs at the time, and he'd know the name of whatever this one looked like. We sat there stunned for a moment as it submerged itself and completely disappeared. The lake must have been deeper than we realized, because I'm not sure how it could have just vanished from sight. My wife finally started moving around and seemed excited. "Did we just see Nessie?" she said. It seemed ludicrous, but I'm not sure what the other explanation would be. In a weird way, I can see how it makes sense. A lot of these cold lakes up north are secluded, and a huge creature, even a dinosaur, could probably sustain itself and stay out of sight if it was smart enough for self-preservation. We stayed almost another 2 hours but didn't see anything else. A good amount of hikers finally started pouring into the area and we decided to head back. We still talk about this once in a while but have no real answer for what it was. Either way, it was a really cool experience and a perfect honeymoon. Hi Donovan. I listen to your stories when I'm out on patrol. It makes the night shift go a lot quicker. I was working the night shift one evening and got a call about a disturbance at an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. I was the only one available, so I took the call. When I arrived, I could see why it was abandoned. It looked like it had been burned down at some point and then left to rot. The windows were all boarded up and there was graffiti everywhere. Local kids love coming out to houses like this and partying, so I figured I just had to scare off some local teens. As I approached, I could hear someone inside yelling and smashing things. I decided to enter the house, and as soon as I did, the temperature dropped, and I got a feeling like somebody was watching me. I called out for the person causing the disturbance, but there was no answer. I started to feel really uneasy, so I decided to head back out and call for backup and wait. As I turned to leave, I saw this figure out of the corner of my eye. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. I chalked it up to nerves and went back to my car and waited for backup. About 10 minutes later, 2 other officers arrived and we went back into the house. We searched every room but didn't find anyone. There was no sign of forced entry or anything that would explain how someone got in. We did find a lot of broken furniture and dishes, but nothing else. Weirdly, the feeling I had when I first entered the house came back. It was like someone was watching us. We searched the house a second time, but I still didn't find anything. As we were about to leave, one of the officers said he saw a figure in the upstairs window. We went outside to look, but there was no one there. Weird things like this happen sometimes on calls, so we didn't think much of it. But ever since that night, I can't shake the feeling that something strange is going on in that house. I'm definitely not going back there anytime soon on my own. But whatever was out there wasn't a human. We checked every corner and closet, and there's no way it could have avoided us. Hi Donovan, I appreciate all the content. This took place in Carlsbad back when I was still on the force, and made a career change to go in IT. It's much calmer and usually not as weird. Carlsbad is known for the caverns and gets a lot of people traveling in and out, so the police out that way are used to getting calls, usually to check on partying or sketchy behavior. It was late and I had been cruising around for a while. Around 2 a.m. I get a call from dispatch. They've got someone reporting a large dog stalking someone on the east side of town. They're asking me to check it out. Sure enough, I find a guy walking down the very middle of the road like he's trying to stay in the streetlights. And when my headlights swing out behind him, I see the thing following him. It looks like a dog at first, and it's walking towards the guy with its head down between its shoulders. I pull up, unlock the doors, and tell him to get in. He does, shaking and locking the door behind him. I'm heading home from the bar, he says. I believe him because I can smell the beer on him. He starts to tell me about how this dog came out of this run-down trailer yard and started stalking him, not going away even when he threw rocks at it. That seems pretty extreme, so I pull a U-turn and head back to see if this thing is still hanging around. Sure enough, it's still walking along the side of the road, totally unafraid of the passing traffic. I grew up with rescue dogs, so the first thing I blurt out is, "Oh, that's just a dog with mange." But as we get closer and the headlights hit it dead on, I realize that it looks more like a hyena than a regular dog, with a rigid spine and almost no hair. The guy is breathing hard and freaking out a bit, so I decide to call it into animal control and get him home. We're only a few minutes away from where he lives, so as soon as I drop him off, I turn around and head back to see if they found it and caught it. I get back to the area and see a truck from animal control parked on the side of the road. I pull up and head over there, but when I start to walk around to the truck, I realize there's no one there. It takes me a few minutes to see the flashlight shining down the road, and I realize that there are some fellow officers of mine at the scene. When I finally find them, there's 2 officers and they both look spooked. One of them, Mario, who I work with on shift regularly, told me that they saw a dog creature as soon as they arrived. It was still trotting down the road in the direction I brought the guy home, almost like it was coming after us, which sounds crazy. But when they cut the creature off and got out of the van, it turned and ran for the trailer park. They managed to follow it for a while before it ducked through a gap in a fence and disappeared. I spent 2 more years as an officer, usually running the night shift. Every time I drove that area, I checked the roads and pull-offs to see if it would show up again. I didn't really want to come across that thing again since everything in me says it wasn't just a stray dog, but part of me wanted to get another look at it. That long, sharp snout and weirdly rigid spine really freaked me out. Animal control never caught it, so it must still be out there somewhere. Hey Donovan, I don't live in Pennsylvania, but my friends and I often travel down there in the summer to go camping a few times a year. We get maybe 5 or 6 of us together, head out to a campground or a secluded area, and spend a few days just bumming around. The year this happened, we decided to check out Bald Eagle State Park, which is close to a lot of attractions, a creek and some cool areas to explore. This time around, there were 5 of us in total. We were camping in a small rustic tent area not too far from the lake. It was late in the night when we arrived, and we all started setting up our tents and getting out our gear. I was with my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife. So we set up our tent near the back of the area by ourselves for some privacy. The rest of our friends were about 10 or 15 feet away and spread out into another campsite. We were close to a small rise, and it was dark enough that you couldn't see past maybe 20 feet in front of you without some light from your flashlight or a fire. That's where things started to get a little weird. My girlfriend and I couldn't sleep, and we were talking for about an hour before we heard something that sounded like wings beating. Whatever it was sounded huge, and we turned to each other completely silent and on edge. The sound died down quickly, and she whispered, "That was probably an owl, right?" But I was thinking about how owls fly silently so they can surprise their prey. I was pretty sure it wasn't an owl, but I didn't want to freak her out. I opened my mouth, but then we heard it again. I grabbed my flashlight and, propping myself up, shined it into the woods through the tent flap. I aimed high into the trees. My girlfriend scrunched up her nose and whispered that she could smell something awful, thick and musty. Then, suddenly, I saw something fly up into the trees. It was black and it had wings that were at least 5 feet across from tip to tip. But they weren't feathered wings. They had more of a rounded shape to them before it disappeared into the shadows, and I couldn't see any other details because it was dark. But it looked like a giant moth or a bat. My heart started racing and I fell back a bit. My girlfriend had seen it too and was frantically texting our friends in the next tent. In the tent next to us was a good friend of mine, and he came out of his tent and yelled for a while and waved around his flashlight. But nothing moved in the trees again. He came back to check on us, and we told him we were okay. That night, neither of us slept very much at all. We told everyone else what happened the next day when they saw us looking around in the wooded area, and they laughed it off, saying it was probably just an owl or a vulture or something normal that we'd never seen before. But whatever it was freaked us out so much that we just decided to stay at this bed and breakfast nearby, using the excuse that we wanted some alone time. That's the last time that my girlfriend and I ever went camping with that group. Hi Donovan, this happened back in 2015 when I was just starting my junior year of college. I finally managed to balance my schedule in a way that got me out of class at 10 a.m. on Fridays. So I was able to camp for a few days at a time. I also lived and was going to college in New England, a great place for outdoor recreation. In the winter of 2012, my friend and I decided to camp out in a yurt that we Airbnb'd. But my friend dropped out at the last minute because he had some makeup work to do. I ended up having to go alone, which was fine with me as I was very comfortable camping on my own. I left Friday morning and drove up to the yurt, which was about a 2-hour drive from where I lived in northwestern Connecticut. The yurt is about 40 minutes to the closest town and is pretty secluded with only a few other houses around it. As I got closer, my GPS kept cutting out and the roads weren't great. But I was driving a Subaru at the time and able to scramble up some iffy turns near the mountains. The first night went great. I had a campfire going and cooked some dinner, then sat back with my book and watched the stars come out as it got darker. It was very peaceful, but when you're alone in nature, you can start to hear things that aren't there, like coyotes howling in the distance or owls hooting off in the woods. It was around this time that I started to hear something different. Not exactly howling or hooting, but more of a deep moaning sound. It would go on for about maybe 10 seconds before stopping abruptly. Then 5 seconds later, it would do it again. This went on for maybe 30 minutes before it finally stopped completely. Maybe it was just an owl calling across the valley, or maybe a deer. Whatever it was made me uneasy enough that after another 30 minutes of staring into the fire, I decided it was time to go to bed. I set up my tent and crawled inside and zipped myself in for the night. I was maybe a little more jumpy than usual with all of the weird sounds, but eventually I ended up falling asleep. Just after midnight, I woke up to the sound of something not too far from the tent. There was the sound of twigs snapping, but louder, which seemed crazy. I carefully moved over to the little plastic window in the yurt and squinted, trying to see what was going on by moonlight. The fire was still dying down too, so the glow of the embers lit up the immediate area about 20 feet from the yurt. I happened to glance at the ground and froze. There were footprints around the far edge of the fire pit, but they were massive, easily too big to be human. My Subaru was close by and I tried to calculate how quickly I could get to it, because something was still crunching around at the edge of the trees behind the yurt. My heart was pounding, and I was hoping that whatever it was slow. Quickly, trying not to panic, I packed up the one bag I'd brought and decided at the last second to forget about the cookware I left near the fire pit. Right near the flap of the yurt, I held my breath and I listened. I could hear kind of a panting back in the woods. Maybe it was a bear, but it still seemed weird that it would linger so close to a camp, especially since I hadn't left any food or anything attractive out. I waited until a branch snapped, hoping that whatever it was distracted, and bolted from the yurt, clicking my car keys desperately. I threw open the door and tossed in my bag, locking up as soon as I was able to, and started the car. I didn't even put my seatbelt on and practically tumbled down the little mountain I was camped on. At that point, it seemed like I was home free. I breathed a little easier on a sturdier dirt road and watched carefully for any signs of deer, as there are a lot in the area. I couldn't have gone more than a few miles when all of a sudden it was right there in front of my car. Something out of a nightmare. This thing was easily 9 or 10 feet tall and gaunt. I mean, it looked starved. Slightly hunched over, and all I could see were its ribs. It was hard to believe it was alive. I shouted and pulled my car over to the right. Luckily, there just happened to be a gravel shoulder that I skidded across, barely avoiding the thing. I was breathing heavy again and practically paralyzed with fear, but happened to glance in the rearview mirror. Whatever it was hadn't moved, and was watching as I drove away. It was then I realized there was a gross smell in the air, like something was decaying. I was pretty freaked out the rest of the week and unable to focus in class. One of my teachers noticed and asked what was up. The story finally spilled out of me and he just froze for a moment, wide-eyed. This teacher is half Native American and teaches some Native courses on campus. After I practically begged him to tell me what the creature was I saw, he pointed me in the direction of some reading. I started reading these stories that all pointed to this thing called a Wendigo. I don't know if I believed that something was after me that night, but I can tell you that whatever it was looked exactly like how Wendigos are described in Native legends. Safe to say that now I don't go camping alone anymore.